What was your finest moment of revenge? Story 1. When I was 11 years old, I was bullied by a 12-year-old boy. He would steal things from my lunch every day. I got sick of it and decided to do something about it. One day I brought a super hot pepper to my lunch and pretended to be really excited about it. Sure enough, the boy comes over, snatches it from my hand and pops it into his mouth. He practically exploded in pain, writhing around the floor, unable to handle the heat. I calmly looked at him and told him that drinking a nice glass of cold water would help immensely. He did so. This promptly magnified the pain 100 times. He never stole food from me again. I regret nothing. Story 2. Driving home around 2 in the morning, 2 cars ahead of me. One is clearly giving the other car a hard time, tailgating him, cutting him off, windows open, and he's yelling at the other guy. I catch up at the light and see a scared older man, 70 plus, getting verbally cussed out by the skid. Now I'm totally sober and I know that cops hang out in the back of the parking lot at work. There are security guards in their off hours. I get the punk's attention and he starts harassing me. 1 mile to go, cussing at me, trying to cut me off. I pull into the parking lot and he follows up. Whip down to the back and yep, there's the cop. Lights come on. Both of us get pulled over, the other guy is screaming and I only have to explain for 30 seconds what happened. I leave the scene like I did my good deed for the day. Story 3. For 10 months I had the worst roommate ever. A 40-year-old guy who acted like he was 21. His parents support him and pay for his condo, which I rented a room with no lease. As such, I had no tenant rights, which he took advantage of. He was loud, drunk, drugged out, and yelling racial obscenities at the TV daily. He was constantly forcing me to listen to his rants about things he had no real knowledge about. This guy was the most spoiled, entitled, and considerate narcissistic person I've ever met. The day I was supposed to move out, he passed the f*** out from the days-long alcohol and drug binge. I moved all my stuff into the truck and was driving off when it hit me. There was a possum carcass on the side of the road near the condo. I went back up, grabbed his barbecue tongs and a bag, and picked up the carcass. I walked back up again, went in, opened the door to his room, and whipped that carcass onto his bed, and walked out of that place for the last time. He never even stirred as the dead possum, rotting and baked by the sun, landed next to him with a sickening plop. He deserves worse, actually, but I did what I could. Story 4. I was once staying at a friend's house in the 7th grade. His older sister thought it would be a good idea to embarrass him in front of me by cracking an egg over his head from the top of the balcony when we got home from school. My friend was infuriated, woke me up at 5 a.m. the next morning, went into the kitchen and started whisking a bowl of eggs. 5 minutes later and 5 eggs later, we went downstairs to his sister's room where he poured the whole bowl of whisked eggs onto her face. The look of horror as she woke up with her face covered in egg was probably one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life. To this day, I should never f*** with him again. Story 5. My first real boyfriend. We kissed instead of just holding hands, kissed another girl and dumped me for her when I was a freshman in high school. She had actively pursued him, although she knew he had a girlfriend, so I blamed her rather than him. Fast forward 4 years. I was a volleyball player throughout college. In the off-season, I played in a city's women league and a co-ed league as an outside hitter. My team played a new team with a familiar face. She didn't recognize me, different high schools, but I immediately recognized her. My team setter kept giving me amazing sets and I kept slamming the ball over the net, just waiting for my shot. Finally, she was in the back row and my setter set me up. I hit the ball and the boyfriend stealer stepped into the hit. It bounced off her foot and went straight up into her face and broke her nose. That's talent right there. Story 6. This is more petty revenge, but yeah. A few years back, my 15-year-old cousin was staying over at my place, which I shared with my boyfriend at the time. Her parents were on vacation in Cuba for a few weeks. While she was with us, we had to make all of our food. She couldn't cook and waited for me or my boyfriend to come home, otherwise she would only eat chips or popcorn. She wouldn't even make a sandwich. One day she updated her Facebook status, which was a whiny complaint about how bored she was. She had free reign to go out, and how weird I was. I guess she forgot I have her on Facebook. It really pissed me off since I made all of her meals and tried my best to keep her company. That night when I was making her a turkey sandwich, I took my revenge. I used the end slices of the bread loaf to build the sandwich and the bitter white part of a romaine lettuce leaf. I also put too much mayo on it. She ate that sandwich and she had a look of annoyance on her face. But there was nothing she could do. Story 7. This may seem small, but this was the most satisfying thing I've ever done. When I was in the 7th grade, I sat behind a jerk who hated me and enjoyed being annoying. Every single goddamn day, he would lean back in his chair and hit the front of my desk over and over again. If I was trying to write something, he would do it even harder. So one day I decided enough was enough. And in the middle of a lesson, he started again. So I waited. And right as he was leaning in his chair back fast, trying to knock my desk hard, I pulled it back. Without my desk behind him, his chair tipped right over and he hit the ground hard. I can still clearly remember whispering, "You b," beneath the laughter of the whole class and the teacher yelling at him to get up. The look on his face was a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and pure rage as he looked up at me from the floor. The bastard never f***ed with me again. I was expecting you to tape a sharpened pencil to the front of your desk, but well played. F*** his ass. Story 8. A repair shop in Moab, Utah messed up our car, which left us stranded in a nearby national park. We called and demanded they tow the vehicle in, and while they said they'd come to get us, they never did. When we talked with park rangers, they were quite familiar with the shop, the biggest in town, and with a terrible reputation. We were on our honeymoon and we had more time on our hands than I imagine most travelers do. We went to the shop, demanded a full refund, and when they refused, we sat out front on the curb in our camp chairs for 2 days with homemade protest signs. I was overwhelmed by the support we got from locals, who honked and waved, stopped and chatted with us, and shared their own stories of horror. The owner called the cops on us, but the joke was on him. We'd already notified the police we'd be protesting. We were well within our rights in doing so. In the end, the shop owner refunded all our money and left visibly distressed when we told him that even with a refund, we weren't sure we were ready to leave town. Eventually we did, but not before filing complaints with the Better Business Bureau and every review site we could find. They had already been booted from the Chamber of Commerce. We ended up becoming friends with an awesome local mechanic and having a great story to tell. Justice was served, and without a tinge of guilt. That sounds like a great honeymoon your wife will always remember. Story 9. When I used to be a cheerleader, we were organizing a trip to Florida from the UK to do some training and to have an awesome holiday. I took charge of organizing the flights and asked everyone if they were okay paying me back if I bought all the flights together. Yeah, I know, bad idea. Anyway, needless to say, one girl changed her mind about going because she was starting a new job, and just before we were due to go, I got a handwritten note in the post from her mother, we were in our 20s, saying that she never agreed to me booking a flight on her behalf and that she wasn't liable to pay me because she had decided not to go. I was in a bit of a panic because I didn't have her home address, and she just ignored all my calls and emails. I wanted to take her to court, but to do that, you have to have their address in order to serve the papers. After spending ages trying to ask around if people knew her address, and even trying to get her friends to give it to me without success, I stayed up all night figuring out a way to figure out where she lived. It literally took me all night, but I managed to hack into her Hotmail account and then her PayPal account, which led me to her home address. I could have just taken the money from her account, but I did want to do this as by the book as possible. She turned up in court accompanied by her mother, and they tried to use Facebook photos to prove that I had used her ticket to take someone else in her place. I came armed with a printout of the airline terms which clearly stated that the tickets were non-transferable. Judgment was swift, the victory was mine. Story 10. David, the kid I was friends with, hit me in the balls 3 times in one night, then called me a wee baby and got in my face. He tried to make me flinch by half swinging at me. I didn't flinch, but instead headbutted him with everything I had. Crushed his nose, blood pouring out of his face. I had a tiny cut in the center of my forehead, with one line of blood running down my face. It looked psychotic, but badass. Also, f*** you for that, David. This has to have been in Scotland. Story 11. Okay, I have 2 older brothers. Eldest is a good person. The middle is a monster. He is a meth-addled felon. He has tortured my family for 20 years, and I have taken the brunt of the assault as the only person willing to openly challenge him. He stole my mother's wedding rings, my grandmother's car, and my TV, to name a few things. My family has decided to try again to welcome him back into their lives, so I followed suit. It's Christmas 2013, the best holiday celebration I could ever imagine. All is well. Middle brother walks in the door to collect presents 2 days after celebrations. Strike 1. Middle brother drops a bag of when he walks in the door. Strike 2. My middle brother criticizes my eldest brother's renovations and tells my grandmother she wasted her money. Strike 3. In the car on the way home, we decided it is best to go back into town together so it saves someone a trip. My middle brother asks me for my passport. I say, no, I can't do that. My middle brother concocts a magical story where I borrowed his ID to get into clubs when I was a teenager. Lies. I did not and would not. He says he needs it to get into a party. He's 300 pounds and 35 and would never be carded under any circumstances. Middle brother differs from his standard method of persuasion, starts yelling and getting increasingly loud and argumentative. I tell him that it is illegal and that it would be very bad for him if he gets caught. There's a line somewhere between asking and demanding something of someone. He crosses it. My heart races like it used to when I was a boy, and he used to follow my friends and me and beat the shit out of us with his friends. I remember him pulling me out of a lake where I almost drowned. But it's not him anymore. The brother I knew is gone and there's a total stranger directly behind me demanding the symbol of my liberty. Strike 4. I tell him that if he mentions my passport again on the ride home, I'll crane the steering wheel into a snowbank and beat him until within an inch of his life. I hear, Give me your passport, in the voice of a man I don't know, from a face I don't recognize. Blood and adrenaline surge from my heart faster and more rapidly than I've ever felt. We pull into a parking lot. I open my door and wait patiently until that works up the courage to fight me. He steps out and yells something I don't hear. I tell him that I'll give him one more chance to get back in the car without saying a word about my passport ever again. He says, "Passport," with a willy grin and expects me to be the same cowering boy that I used to be. The same kid who loved him and adored him and wanted nothing else but to be just like him. I connect the quickest and hardest fist I've ever thrown against another person directly onto his chin. Blood spurts out of his mouth with the second blow. He hits me twice above and below my right eye. I completely lose my shit and wail on the left side of his face until it is a broken and bloody ruin. If you're reading this, middle brother, fuck you. I have the biggest revenge boner right now. Story 12. Not me, but my mom. When I was 9, I'm 26 now, my parents went through a really rough divorce. Long story short, my dad had a very public and long-term affair with a prominent public figure in our area. We'll call her Debbie. Naturally, my mother was humiliated, but back then she was quite meek and assuming and not at all vindictive. She only did one thing to the woman that broke up my family. My mom is a nurse, and about 6 months after the divorce, she was attending a medical conference in our area. As she walks into the room, she saw that one of the panelists was the woman who slept with her husband. Shocked, but always in control, my mother calmly walked to the very front of the row and sat down silently in front of Debbie. Now, Debbie had been a family friend for over a decade, so my mom was intimately familiar with her upbringing and unfortunate issues. Remembering that she was an English Lit major in undergrad, my mom took out a red Sharpie and drew a very large A on the notebook that she brought to the conference. She turned it around and faced it directly at Debbie, never saying a word. Debbie was visibly agitated, and when it came time for her to speak, something amazing happened. She started ticking. You see, my mother also knew that Debbie had a condition that, when under immense stress, despite significant speech therapy and experience in public speaking, she began to twitch and stutter. She twitched so much that it impaired her speech, and she had to rush her portion. When she ended, my mother calmly shut her notebook, smiled at the woman, and walked out of the room. She never spoke a word. That was the last they saw of each other. Literary burn. Story 13. Late to the party, but here's mine. In high school, one of my best friends started dating my ex-boyfriend that day after we broke up, which happened to be my 16th birthday. So then and there, I decided to ruin her sweet 16, but just wasn't sure how. Fast forward 3 months, she planned an extravagant birthday party and played hooky from school the Friday before the big party to prepare. This was my opportunity. I told everyone at school that she had gotten the flu and was postponing the party, hence why she wasn't in school. We were neighbors, so everyone bought it. The next day, she got all dolled up and arrived at her sweet 16 party in a large rented ballroom, only to spend the entire party with her mom and little sister. Not one person showed up. Looking back, it was terrible and mean, but to a 16-year-old girl, I felt she broke the sacred girl code. That's never okay. Story 14. I was living in a Middle Eastern country a few years back. Nice place, but because 50% of the population in the region is under the age of 20, the roads are simply overrun by teenage and early 20s douchebags. The culture's fatalism makes young guys even more reckless and irresponsible than they are already programmed to be by their hormones. So after a rare rain shower, the highway's flooded up again, 18 inches deep. Traffic is backed up for at least a mile, and it takes us 15 minutes to get to the flooded patch. Everyone is pissed. Then I see 2 cars full of teenage douchebags passing people on the shoulder on the right from way behind me. There's just no excuse for that horse. Eventually they get to where I am and they pass me just as we're reaching the 50-yard stretch where the flooding is crossing the road. And wouldn't you know it, one of them crosses into the far left lane and one stays in the right lane to avoid the deep water, in the middle lane. And wouldn't you know it, their windows are rolled down. I'm in a Toyota Land Cruiser, a nice big 4WD, so while they're crawling through a foot of water in their little Action Boy Hondas, I decide f*** it and gun it between them through the deep stuff in the middle lane. The wave from my front wheels was about 6 feet high, and it had to have put 20 gallons of water through the windows of both cars, completely drenched. All of them, with nasty urban stormwater runoff. Of course, they chased up after me once they cleared the water, screaming and cursing, but I just pretended to be on my phone and ignored them. Eventually, they gave up and, I hope, figured I had just been as impatient and selfish as them and had hosed in my accident. Most satisfying revenge of my life. This is my favorite. That's excellent revenge. Story 15. In 4th grade gym, I discovered heartbreak, revenge, and victory all in one class period. Moments before class had started, my boyfriend dumped me because I was too weird. There I sat in disbelief and sadness, and he just ran around like nothing happened. We were put on opposite teams, only making the chasm between us greater. Now, I am possibly the worst person at sports, wiffle ball being no exception. I stepped up to the orange rubber plate, the bat heavy in my hands, the ex was pitching and called out to everyone in the outfield. "Don't worry about this one, she can't hit anything." I was embarrassed. I was heartbroken. Mostly I was pissed. I said nothing, watching as he casually cocked back his arm. His eyes gleamed as the ball flew from his grip, careening towards me. I raised my bat and swung with all of my measly strength. The wiffle ball met my bat with a dull plastic whack. Next, the wiffle ball met the ex's balls, square on. I watched as he crumpled to the floor, a wailing heap. My team cheered for me as I ran around the bases, greeting me with high fives as I cleared home. It was beautiful. Story 16. An old post of mine. I used to go to a public school where the majority of students were low to middle class Italian origin kids of immigrants, 90% plus. Tough going, to say the least. When I was in high school, I used to get bullied by a guy called Ronaldo. We had a few scraps, either verbally or fisticuffs over the years. I was always the type of guy who wouldn't take other people's shit, and while others bugged at giving me a hard time, particularly when I went through puberty and became one of the tallest, largest guys in school, he somehow always managed to give me a hard time. It was a tough time, but in a way, I paid my dues early and learned from a stern father that if people punched you, you punch back and you punch harder, and you'll know if they are men or not. As luck would have me, Ronaldo ended up in the same college I went to, and he always managed to somehow, some way be a little shit to me. What made things worse is that we fell for the same girl. Andrea, who eventually became my girlfriend of over 4 years. Everyone knew he had feelings for her and that it killed him she was with me and not him. He always tried to seduce her with random calls and emails. Being the son of a wealthy father who owned his own construction company, that he had nice cars, lots of money, and a bunch of shit that I didn't have and over the years worked hard to earn, coming from a low-income family that was having problems making ends meet. He was a constant issue during the first years of my relationship, and we had several conflicts. Years later after college and shortly after I broke up with Andrea, I received an email from him out of the blue. I never corresponded with him. Facebook didn't exist back then. And he went out and told me in an epic letter that went too far long, swore at me in excess and used terrible English, no wonder he never finished college, and dropped out to work with daddy. Basically, it was a no one liked me in college and to fuck off. I haven't seen him in well over 2 years, nor did we have any real friends in common. As a way to keep my cool, did I want him to have the satisfaction to get me mad? I never responded to his emails. He sent several. However, I couldn't let his taunting go without consequences, so I went online and Googled his name. After searching around a bit, I easily found a complete profile of him regarding his career, where he worked, and what type of work it was. His father passed away recently, and he now owned his father's business and had a team of employees working for him. I spied a bit more and hung on to the address of his place of employment for several weeks while I plotted. One day I proceeded to go into a local shop and purchase the largest, fattest, floppiest black dildo that I could find. Along with some KY jelly, I went home, wrote a special note for him, and put it along with a big fat black dildo and KY jelly, and boxed it in a standard box that couldn't be traced back to me, and sent it priority mail that required for him specifically to sign. The note read, "Since you have so much time to search out people that never gave a shit about you to begin with, I figured you'd have enough time to go fuck yourself with this." One of our mutual acquaintances dropped me an email a few days later. This acquaintance worked for Ronaldo during his internship, and apparently the package arrived while they were preparing to head out for a team lunch on a Friday. He was very excited to get the box opened, since Ronaldo thought it was something he ordered online that he was expecting and would make it a good weekend. And he opened it in front of a number of coworkers, and instead of whatever he ordered, he pulls out a giant black floppy dildo. Priceless.